This is Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show with Jenn Vogel, a top-rated live stream and podcast in the market research and insights industry. We're live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Join Jenn and her guests for this live discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Also available on podcast channels. This live stream is presented to you by Vox Pop Me, the leader in video research and ranked #1 in qualitative research by Grit 2 years running. Here's today's live conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. I'm Jenn Vogel, and a quick reminder before we start. Thank you to our knowledgeable guests and awesome viewers and listeners. Real Talk is a finalist in the Market Research Podcast of the Year. The winner is determined by your vote. So I hope you will get in and right-click on the link in the notes. Remember to cast your vote today. I think the votes are about to close, so please make sure to get it in. Thank you. Let's get going with today's episode. Today I want to talk about accessibility in market research with Regine Gilbert, a usability and accessibility expert. Welcome, Regine.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here and talk to you about accessibility, which is at the heart of a lot of the work that I do.
Amazing. Well, it's great to have you as an expert on that topic on the show today. We can jump right in and I'll just kind of start off by asking when we talk about accessibility in market research, what do we mean by that? What does that mean to you?
So in terms of the digital world, when folks hear the word accessibility, it tends to mean that products, services are made with people with disabilities in mind. Although this can also extend to access to, high-speed internet or things of that nature as well, because I think we tend to, in the United States, more than half of the US does not have high-speed internet. And if you're making things that are super heavy or big downloads, it may not be as accessible as it could be.
Absolutely. And I mean, this became, just by that description, became a big topic, certainly within the last year and a half with children and their access to equipment for homeschooling and things like that. Does that kind of fall under that same category?
Oh, completely. So I live in New York, in Brooklyn, and when the pandemic hit and schools closed, there were so many people who don't have home computers, don't have internet at home, were using their parents' phones for homework, right? The city promised all these iPads would go out. There were lots of things, and I know things were happening in other states as well, in other cities as well. So, yeah.
Interesting. And so when we're thinking about market research and creating products and services, or anything that we want to put out into the market, what are some of the biggest issues that companies have with accessibility when it comes to kind of gathering insights?
Yeah, I think one of the top reasons why projects aren't as accessible as they could be is because folks in the disability community, or whatever community people are targeting, are not included in the process of creation, of project planning, and all of that. So there's a phrase that's oftentimes used in the disability and accessibility worlds, which is nothing about us without us. Mm. So the reason why so many things are not accessible is because it's either an afterthought or people don't think about it at all in the process, and they don't include folks with disabilities
in the design of those products or those services.
In the design, and not only the design, but also in the prep, in the project plan. I mean, whatever project in my past life, I was a project manager, and you make a plan, you make a project plan, you make a plan with risks, and how you're going to mitigate those risks. And when one of the questions that I've asked over the years is one way to start a project is, who might you be excluding from the start?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of times people don't even know who they're excluding. And I'm thinking about a conversation we had on the show early in the year, probably January, one of our first episodes actually, with Eva Tsai from Google. And she was talking about how important it is in, building technology that the team that's building it is representative of the entire user base, and gave an example of when YouTube first launched, there were no left-handed engineers on the team. So anyone who was left-handed, all of their videos were going in upside down. So that's, a very, pretty harmless, challenge there. But just like, if you don't have a representative group of people that are designing that product or that service or planning that project, as you mentioned, how do you even know who you're not representing?
I think that we can't do things and we can't continue to do things the way that we've always done them. We have to think differently about, people want their businesses to scale. They want to grow their businesses. And when you exclude people, you are making sure that you're not going to be growing, your business. So if you're thinking of a specific target market, and you know that target market, then who's not in that target market that you could possibly reach? And oftentimes it is people with disabilities who are left out of the thought process. And I just like to see more of it included, as people start a project.
Yeah, for sure. Well, because what you said before about it sort of being an afterthought is really interesting. Like, is it too far in the process at that point to say, oh, wait a second, we've been working on this for 6 months, but have we considered people with disabilities? Like, how many decisions have already been made at that point, that group in mind?
Yeah.
So, a lot of our audience is going to be, the insights community, people doing market research about these products that are going to market, things like that. So, when researchers are designing market research with accessibility in mind, what are some recommendations you might have about doing that, like including a representative community of potential users in the research stages?
Yeah, I would say, there's so many communities that folks can get in touch with. There are organizations that they do this for their work. There's organizations like Knowability and who you can actually get them to come in and say, hey, we're working on this project. We'd like, some help with this. I think that doing co-design, participatory design, because I come from a design background, but within people's own towns and cities, there are local communities that you can reach out to and say, hey, we're working on this product. We want to get input from the community and reach out and definitely compensate folks. I mean, I'm a big proponent of not just, oh, well, we're doing this, pay people. And it can be big or it can be small depending on what your budget is. But I think that it's important to compensate folks.
Yeah, and tell them that, not only is your time valuable, but your opinion and your thoughts are valuable too in us designing this product or this service or creating something accessible to everyone. So why do you think companies are struggling with accessibility for, really in all stages of product design and project management, and as you're mentioning?
Yeah, well, you're in the marketing world, right? I mean, you have probably been in this for a while. One, I don't think it's something that's taught in schools or any sort of program. Two, there aren't, major initiatives that people tend to follow sometimes what the bigger brands are doing. And until recently, I would say there wasn't a big push for things, but that were accessible. But I would say the pandemic shifted so much, right? So let's take Zoom, for example.
Mm-hmm.
People use Zoom on occasion, but we have become a Zoom world, right? And part of what happened with Zoom was that there was no captions
Mm-hmm.
early on, right?
Yeah.
And so this is something that people could have captions, but it was a third party.
Right.
And this is something that Zoom had to research. Like, is it really worth it for us to implement captions on this platform? And they ultimately found that it was. Why do researchers struggle? Because they don't think about it.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like instead of, if we're thinking of things as being proactive or reactive, being proactive, we can really, I don't know, we can set things up and in a way that is useful to, I'm a researcher too. So things that are useful to us as researchers, it can be challenging sometimes to recruit, but people know people who know people. I mean, we all we're all connected. What is it? The
6 degrees of separation from Kevin
the
Bacon.
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon is what I think of. But we all know people, and the truth is, in the United States, that 1 in 4 people have a disability. And a lot of times people think if I say the word disability, then people assume, oh, it's someone in a wheelchair or it's something visible that you can see. But the truth is, so many people are colorblind and you can't see that. People are dyslexic. You can't see that. You can't see when people have ADHD. You can't see when people have depression, right? These all fall under the umbrella. And because so many people got COVID, there's kind of this new category of disability with the long haulers. So there's a lot of things to consider in the area of research, but I would say being aware and being prepared.
Sorry, there's my dog, Henrik. He's very interested in this topic. Every once in a while, he makes a guest appearance on the show. Perfect timing.
Yeah.
What was I just going to say? Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of being proactive as opposed to reactive, it's reminding me of another conversation I had with Khalil from Insights in Color. And we were talking about this more along the lines of multicultural research and how that can't be a component of your research. You can't do your research and then your multicultural component. Like, we live in a multicultural world, a multicultural country, society, like everything needs to be representative, regardless of what your kind of objectives of that research. And this feels very similar. Like, we need to be proactively thinking about, when you say 1 in 4 people have a disability, that's striking to me. That's a huge portion of the people that we're living and working with on a day-to-day. So if we're not being conscious of incorporating all of the proper viewpoints into our research, we're going to miss stuff. Right. And I think too, like, it's probably a good chance that we are getting people with disabilities in our research, right? That might be, dyslexic, or actually, I was chatting with one of my colleagues earlier this week about, so we do video surveys, and we had gotten a video from someone in our community saying, I love being able to give my feedback via video because I'm dyslexic and it's really difficult for me to type out responses in research. And we found that very, very interesting. So people are in there, but it's maybe questions we haven't asked, or we're not, we can't see in a survey response that someone is dyslexic. So we're not conscious of making sure that we're representing that population if we're not being proactive.
Right.
The other thing that I think is really interesting about what you said, we've used Zoom and it exploded, and now it's like it's its own verb, basically. And I was listening to a podcast, a crime podcast, of course, and they were talking about so they were covering a case that was happening during COVID, and they kept describing, oh, we were on WebEx, and they kept saying, the court's version of Zoom. The court's version of Zoom is WebEx. Like, WebEx has been around for ages, like way longer than Zoom has in my experience. So it's really interesting how things do explode so quickly when there's such a massive change in society. And it's really interesting to hear how there have been, I think they needed to upgrade their security immediately, their accessibility immediately. There was just so much required. But to your point, it was all in reaction to what was happening in the market or in the world.
Yeah. And what we're seeing with the pandemic, right? We're seeing more people working from home. Mm-hmm. And, what are people's needs then if they're working from home? And I think that we can, I don't know, there's so much opportunity here to get more folks with disabilities employed, because you don't actually need people to go to the office, right? Mm-hmm. And therefore you could get more accessible and inclusive products out there and services out there when you can hire these folks. So I would say, whoever is listening out there, there's a whole lot of people who are willing and able to work. They may not be able to come physically to the office, but they can certainly do the work. And you're also getting the input of a community that you may not have included before.
Yeah, that definitely creates a really kind of unique opportunity, right? Yeah. To expand a bit more and not be limited by location or really anything to hire people to do a good job. I think there's a big split right now, and that's, probably another tweet of yours that could go viral. Companies are very divided, and I think still trying to figure out the work from home and work from office. And, but it's certainly not, I haven't heard much that part of the conversation, right? Of what opportunities does that create, the ability to work from home, and how advantageous is it for a business to have a more representative workforce in designing products and services that are going to, serve a community where 25% have some sort of a disability.
Yeah.
It does seem like, the conversation is happening a lot more, certainly in terms of mental health and things like that. So it feels encouraging that, a lot of these conversations maybe that weren't happening before are starting to happen more now than they ever have. And that maybe that is what's needed to, drive change within businesses. Is that something you're seeing as well?
Well, I've been working with digital accessibility for about 6-7 years at this point. I haven't been in it that long. Some of my mentors have been in it for much longer than me. And what I have seen over the past, I would say really the last 5 years, I've seen a lot more people talking about accessibility. There's a lot more tools with accessibility. There are companies like Fable who will work. It's a company that employs people with disabilities that will work with companies for testing, for research, and all kinds of things. And this didn't exist 5 years ago. So my hope is, 10 years from now, that we're going to see a lot more accessible, not only like digital things, but physical as well. I mean, when I get an email, that's an email marketing, and I hope that it's accessible, so many things. So I used to work in e-commerce for many years. And, a few of the companies that I worked for would send out these emails with discount codes and discounts, like, they'd have an image, and within the image would be the discount code, but there would be no alternative text within that email. And therefore, if someone is blind or using a screen reader, they don't know that discount code is there. Thinking about from a web perspective, can I maneuver on your site if I'm only using the keyboard? You know, so there's so many things to think about and consider, but we can consider them, and we can make our marketing and our materials way more accessible.
Yeah, that's interesting about the image descriptions, because that's something I've noticed like very recently in the last maybe 3 months or so, just on social media, whether it's individuals posting or companies posting sponsored advertising, like descriptions, written descriptions of what's happening in an image. You know, if I take a picture of you now, you know, woman sitting on chair with blanket, but like it'll actually spell that out. And the first couple of times I saw that, I was like, why is it, you know, what is that about? And so I did a little research to try to understand what that was. And it was exactly what you mentioned, people that are blind and are using a screen reader so that they can participate in the conversation or see what's being advertised or, you know, whatever it might be. And I mean, to your point earlier in the conversation, I would never be aware of that prior to kind of seeing it and starting to explore it. So it certainly is sort of a reactive thing, but it seems to be happening more and more. Like people are becoming more and more aware.
Yeah, years ago, I don't know. I went to a talk, and it was somebody from Pinterest, and they were talking about it was like we're going to play a guessing game. So they showed like an image of a beach and sand, and then they showed the same image, but the second image had a description of this is XYZ beach and whatever, you know, and they said, well, which one do you think gets more engagement? I'll ask you, which one do you think gets more engagement? The one without the description or the one with it?
Yeah, probably the one with the description.
Yeah. So the one with the description got more engagement. And the same goes for videos that have captions on social media, right? So many times, and I know this, I mean, I could speak for myself, but there's also research behind this, that when there's captions on videos, that people engage with those videos more, because a lot of times people might be in public or they're wherever, and they don't have their sound on because they don't want it. So they could see, you know, what someone is saying. Right. And it's really nice to have. So, I mean, there's some content creators where I will comment like, please add captions.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, but even that, like, I mean, we post all our videos with captions, but we think of it as, well, you know, someone doesn't want to turn their sound on, you know, or if someone is in a public place and they don't want, you know, we rarely think, well, maybe someone is actually looking at this who is deaf and wants to see the conversation. So to think of it in that way, is so much more inclusive and making sure that we're accommodating for everyone's abilities or disabilities. Do you have any other maybe examples you can share of accommodations that businesses should be thinking about when, you know, email marketing or communicating digitally with their customers?
Yeah, I think that, you know, definitely there's whole things out there about social media. You always want to add alternative text to your images, not only for people who are using screen readers, but again, you know, earlier I said not everybody has high-speed internet, right? So if someone does not have high-speed internet and there's no alternative text, so for folks who don't know what alternative text is, it's an image description of what something is. And oftentimes, like on a website, people have seen this in the past where you could say, you know, it could be a dog with a ball or whatever. And you being able to see that is because somebody added that alternative text for that image. So having alternative text can benefit folks who use screen readers, but it can also benefit people who are in areas of low bandwidth. I think always providing captions, you know, and I know that it's not always possible. And if it's not possible to provide captions, then provide a transcript. And if you can do both, that's great. Definitely look at the colors that are being used on any sort of emails or your website and making sure that it's high contrast. We've all been outside and look at our phones and we can't see what's on the screen. And a lot of times it's because the contrast is not, high enough. Another thing to think about when you're creating any sort of digital asset is that people use dark mode on their computers. So whatever it is you're making, you should make sure you're using colors that can work in light mode or dark mode. I mean, there's so many things, but to consider. What else? That's just off the top of my head.
No, that's great. I think it's good to have, specific things that people can be thinking about when they're creating content or when they're communicating with people. The high contrast thing is interesting. I hadn't thought of that. But it makes sense. Certainly, I know what it feels like to be in the bright sunlight and pull my phone out and not be able to see anything.
Yeah. This was a few years ago, but I was watching a basketball game and the score was being shown with a yellow background and white text.
Oh, God.
So I am struggling. I was like, I can't see what the score. I mean, I knew kind of. Yeah. I was like, I can't see the score. Who would use yellow background and white text, which is so difficult to read, Mm-hmm. And I was with my husband and I was like, oh, I'm going to tweet at the NBA and ESPN and, and probably, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, it changed. And my husband's like, you got them to change it. And I go, I really don't think it was me. I really think it was somebody there. It was like, we can't see the score. But it was live and something that's happening. So this kind of thing happens. The color contrast thing is actually the number one issue on the web when it comes to accessibility. So it's like one of the easier things to fix because there are color contrast checkers that exist out there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting that's such a big focus right now on the web. And by the way, next time you tell that story, you 100% are the reason why. You have to tell everybody. I tweeted and then it changed. And
no, yeah, I don't think it was me. I really think somebody, because it was going on for a while. I was like, what's happening here?
Somebody had to notice it and say, nobody can see this. Well, that's really interesting. And I really appreciate all the insight on this. I think, our audience certainly, I just got a message from someone saying, I'm watching your live right now with Regine. This is so interesting. So I normally don't pay attention to those messages, but thank you for listening and for messaging me. Yeah. So this has been great. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the show. For all of you that are listening out there live, thank you. Don't forget to rate and review our show wherever you listen to podcasts. Please remember to vote for us for Market Research Podcast of the Year at the link in the notes. On the next episode, I am joined. My notes here say Ben Phillips, but I think there's another episode in between. So maybe it'll be a surprise for you all. We've got double episode this week. So I will see you all on Thursday and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.